Welcome to the HR Talent and Culture track. Last track of the day, last track of Austin Startup Week. I'm so excited to be here with you guys. My name is Marianne Alspa. I am the Director of Events and Programming here at Capital Factory and also one of the organizers of Austin Startup Week. I'm so honored to be a part of this track. I'm so excited to be the MC. We've got a huge sessions packed for today. We have 3 happening as well as networking to get to know the other attendees. We will be closing out the day with an in-person happy hour for HR and culture and the sales and biz dev happy hour at Central Machine Works at 5 o'clock. You don't want to miss that one. It's going to be so fun. We had a happy hour there yesterday, the marketing and branding track, and it was just so much fun. So hope to see you guys there. Before we get started, I just wanted to welcome everyone and share a little bit about me. I've been with Capital Factory for 3 years now. I have been lucky enough to start as a coordinator and move my way up in the company. I have managed some incredibly dynamic teams, including some really high performers. And I'm super excited that I got to be a part of this track. We'll be kicking off things here at 12:30. We'll have our first session, Humanity in the Workplace, Culture and Tribe. So I hope you guys can all join us back here. I'm going to hop back over into networking, and I hope to see you guys there. Thank you so much, and I'll see you at 12:30. Please help me welcome to the stage Charisse Fontes from Culture Circle. Charisse, welcome.
Hey y'all, hey, how's it going? I'm super excited to be here. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you have a great session.
Thank you, I will. Hey y'all, I am super excited to be here with you. I have prepared a little visual for us and a video, so I'm going to share a few slides and come in and out during our time together. If you have any questions or comments or anything you want to share, just feel free to do so in the chat. We're going to spend some really good time together talking about humanity in the workplace, culture, and tribe. All right. So I want to set the intention for what we are going to talk about today. I want to introduce a culture philosophy to you. There's some things around culture that have happened in the past, that are happening in the present, and that will happen in the future. And this philosophy is the thread that captures all of those dimensions. I want to dive into the pillars of culture. This is where you are going to get some good nuggets on areas to really help with after you've built a solid foundation for your culture. And then I want to share some gifts and good vibes with you today. We're just going to have a good time. But let me introduce myself. My name is Charisse Fontes, and I like people to know, first and foremost, I am human. And everything that comes after my humanness are things that make my heart sing and solving things that break my heart. So I'm an active author. I am a speaker. I'm a heart leader on all things people and culture. And I run 2 companies at this time. The first company is called Culture Circle, where we help companies create healthy and inclusive workplace cultures. We're going to talk a lot more about that later. The second company that I run is called Humanity Power. It's a nonprofit that's focused on ending the isms. So ageism, ableism, classism, colorism, sexism, racism, colorism. We are focusing on ending that with high vibrational education, building and enriching communities, and with a lot of few other activities. It's a really amazing nonprofit organization. And a lot of the hard work that stems from, or is the seed to the things that I do, is I'm a self-taught anthropologist and also a birth doula. So for those that don't know what a birth doula is, we help families birth their babies. So while midwives and doctors tend to do things more medically, we do everything but catch the baby. So I'm at the precipice of birth, and I might use some birth analogy here. We'll see how it goes. But as a birth doula, a lot of what I see is the beginning of humanity. I get to sit at the point of creation, and it is a beautiful, beautiful thing. So that is what I wanted to share about myself as we dive in. And again, just remembering that our humanness is what makes up a lot of the things that we see around us. And so this is such a beautiful session to talk about that. So I have a video that I'd like for us to watch. This is going to set the tone for what we are going to talk about. So sit back. I'm going to explain it all in a little bit, but enjoy. This is one of my favorite videos. Oh, I will add, if you feel any certain way, if you have a notebook around you, just jot down what feelings or what emotions or what you are thinking as you're watching this video. All right. Are you back with me? That was a very powerful video. What did we just watch here? I'm not able to see the comments just yet, but if you know what we just watched, go ahead and drop it in the comments. I'm going to talk a little bit about this. We just watched what is called the Haka. This is Amari tribe tradition. And when I think about culture and how deep culture runs, I immediately think about this Haka. Specifically, this one is over 100 years old. And there are many different types of hakas. This one specifically was a haka, a chief put together for his son who was going through a hard time. And even the words in the haka, which I'll explain in a little bit, tell this story. Essentially, what this chief is doing is saying, hey, you are carrying a problem. Like, what is going on with you? And the son is battling something, and the chief, the father, is telling the son, the answers that you need are within you. And this, like I mentioned, has been going on for, this haka is about 100 years old. What I'm trying to share here is culture runs deep. It is still done today. It is still very powerful. Culture has a collection of traditions that really make up the people, make up the experiences that we have. The way that it is in the anthropological world is also the same way that it translates into the workplace. The culture is that strong. It can carry generations, and it also can collapse generations. It can carry companies, and it can also collapse companies. And so today, what I really want to paint is this beautiful picture of this dichotomy that cultures can provide, not only inside of the workplace, but outside of the workplace. The richness that is outside is also an inside. And if you're interested in more about this specific haka, you can always reach out to me. I'm happy to share more about this. But I want to get to um, what am I talking about when I talk about culture? And this deriving from what we just watched and how we utilize culture, especially within Culture Circle and with our client partners. How are we defining culture? Well, here's the definition. Culture is an ever evolving survival mechanism that consists of thoughts, beliefs, actions, and responses that the people, your humans in the workplace, use to achieve a mutually satisfying goal. The core component is it is a ever evolving survival mechanism. So the culture will do whatever it needs to do to survive. Speaking up when they feel safe, and not speaking up when they don't feel safe. And so I'd like for you to wrap around this definition of culture as we dive into a little bit deeper of what we're going to be talking about. Okay, another analogy I like to use for companies and culture is like an island. Your company, the organization that you are in right now, consider it to be an island. And on that island, you have your humans and you're working towards what you're doing. And around that island is the water. You have the weather, which is the macro culture. So this isn't something I'm going to get into today, but the macro culture are things that are happening outside of your culture. So it can be political, it could be social economics, it could be social injustice, things that are happening outside of your company in the world is the macro culture. I will point out that the macro culture always influences the microculture. So you have a microculture within your company. It is usually influenced by what's happening outside. The microculture rarely changes a lot of the overall ecosystem of the macroculture. Not to say that it doesn't happen, but it's more there's more fluctuation from the macro than it is from the micro. And so looking at your culture as an island, there are some pillars that are very, very key. I mean, the first one is the foundation. So you must have a good foundation for your island to exist. And that really is all dependent upon what you are using to navigate your culture. I remember back in the day at startups, like culture was, that kombucha in the fridge and the ping pong tables and the happy hours. There was a lot of talk around. We have a work hard, play hard culture, which meant that we we work really hard, heads down, and then we go and drink afterwards. Well, sometimes those foundations don't really hold weight when you are navigating life. The interesting thing about business is a linear is a linear construct. You're up and to the right, or you're not, or you're scaling, or you're not. There's linear. It's linear. Whereas the humans in the workplace are lunar, and so there's humans will always be the variable. So whenever something is built on anything that's not anchored within the foundation of the culture tends to fluctuate as the people change and things evolve. And so we're going to talk about the pillars around the foundation of your culture. But thinking of it as an island is going to give it some really good meat as you're navigating some things around your culture and company. So when you think of the word culture, what words would you use to describe it? I'm going to pause my share for a second and go into the chat and just see what y'all have said. But like when you think of the word culture, what words would you use to describe it? So if somebody came up to you and said, "Hey, this organization that you're at, how would you describe the culture?" Or what words would you use to describe culture? So I'm going to stop sharing for a second and see what y'all have to say. Thank you for your comment of definition of culture. Appreciate that. Gonna just take a moment and see what y'all think about that. What are some words that come up when you think of culture? I remember when I was interviewing at one culture or one company, and they said, "We have our culture is like a family." I was like, "Oh, can you describe that anymore?" They're just like, "We're like family." I was like, "That's interesting," because family in so many different dialogues means so many different things. All right, we got some comments coming in. Empathetic, identity, and group behavior. Nice. Culture is clarifying. Oh, yes, it adds a lot of clarity. Formal, informal. What people do in their say in their day-to-day. Yes. How to interact with people. Absolutely. Great. Culture sets the tone for how we act. Yes, and it sets the tone for how we respond. So I love that you brought that up. Fantastic. These are really, really great. I'm going to go ahead and share again as we dive into a little bit deeper. If you have any more comments or anything you want to add, continue to add them. I'm going to come back out and join y'all. And again, after we go through some of this. Okay. So keeping it super simple. I like to keep things simple. Here are 4 pillars that we are going to talk about, and I actually have a bonus one. So it's like 4 plus 1. Hiring. So, in the idea of how, let's think of your culture or your company as an island. How and who you bring onto that island is going to determine the success of that island. Each person, there's a lot of talk around, I don't know if y'all have ever heard this, but culture fit. We need to X that because anyone you bring on is going to be a culture add, or they're going to be a culture deficit. So paying attention to that. Most of the time you do not want people that are culture fits, because in that moment, in that time, as your culture is evolving, that person might actually be stagnant and stuck if you're hiring for culture fit. So who and how you are bringing people onto the island, that's the first pillar we're going to dive into. Onboarding. So this is a 2-part one. I didn't want to add too many words, but onboarding, I think of it in 2 parts. It's welcoming. It's the entry point after that flows in from how you're hiring. the entry point after they sign an offer letter, or leading up to that welcoming, and it ends on the first day. So how are you welcoming your people? And then the onboarding, which lasts about 3 weeks, is such a prime time. How you onboard your people, how you not only bring them onto the island, but how you integrate them with what's going on is super key. I always think about the first day and the last day is how you want to think about your um, entire employee life cycle. How can you make the best first day, and what are they going to feel on their last day? Because those are the 2 days you will never be able to change. And they tend to stick with people. I still remember some of my first days. So we're going to go through some of that onboarding component. Leadership. Okay, this one probably of an obvious pillar, but I'm going to give you something that is super unique to how you build and define and navigate leadership in regards to culture. There is something very specific that the culture needs from leadership. And yes, they need leadership to be empathetic. They need leadership to be kind. They need the leadership to have a vision. But there are two specific things that the culture is requiring of leadership. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And one of my favorite ones to talk about, or I get really giddy about, between onboarding and appreciation, is appreciation. It is one of the most overlooked components within a culture. Most of the time, especially back in, I would say, 2016s to maybe up into the 2020s, probably even a little bit further back, but don't quote me on dates, y'all, is this notion of employee engagement. Well, engagement doesn't happen. Like, if you think about an engagement, when my husband proposed to me and we became engaged, I wouldn't have said yes if I didn't feel appreciated and loved and seen and heard and witnessed by him. The same is true for your people. Appreciation is actually the supersedes engagement. So while a lot of companies are like, how's our employee engagement? They're not paying attention to, do your people even feel appreciated? So we're going to talk about that pillar and what you can do. So my goal here is to be able to gift you with some very core components that line up with these pillars. And I'm not going to leave you without talking about the main pillar within culture. But I'm not going to get to that now. I'm going to actually stop sharing, come back to you, and go through each of these pillars together with you. And if you have any questions about any of these pillars that we're going to talk about, put them in the chat. I will answer them in real time. If I don't get to all of them, find me and I will answer them for you. All right. So let me stop sharing again. It's like a little song and dance. All right. So let's talk about hiring. I already painted a little bit of the picture. It's who and how, or how and who you bring onto the island. Each person is a culture add because should be a culture add. If you find that you are bringing on people that are actually taking from the culture, that will collapse your culture very quickly. I was talking to somebody the other day that had a thriving company. They were running and going and, still within the first few years, but everything was going really well. And then they brought in somebody to the culture. And within a year, their company was done. You want to be very mindful of how and who you hire. And I will say that in the context of humanity, we've been trying to figure out this hiring and interviewing component for a while. I don't know if y'all remember that there used to be on resumes, there used to be I don't know if I'm going to date myself here, but putting the typing speed that you had on your resume was super relevant. And it was a factor. In fact, staffing companies would test against that. And that would be something that would either put you ahead in the process or either put you behind. We tend to still hold on to the antiquated components of hiring. but our humanity has evolved over the time. So questions like, why do you what are your greatest strengths and weaknesses need to be transformed into, if you could up level one area in your life, what would that be? That in that question, it holds a lot more depth and a lot more weight than, tell me about your strengths, tell me about your weaknesses. So just rethinking the way that you are bringing people onto the island and who you're bringing onto the island is really key. Let's see. That's all I wanted to say there. If anyone has any questions about that specific hiring pillar, let me know. I'm happy to answer. I'm going to move on to the onboarding piece. And like I mentioned, in the first few weeks, that is the most strategic time that you have to co-create with the people, the humans that you are bringing onto this island. Allows your people, this is the time for them to gain grounding, confidence, and connection to your company and things that are happening. Clarity and consistency is key. So I wish I could see y'all and ask for a show of hands. How many of you have had an amazing first day experience, and how many of you have had a less than desirable first day experience? I mean, this is a really big deal. You spend all of this time and money and effort bringing people to the island only to leave it anticlimactic as they just fend for themselves. It really does have a lasting effect on how long your people stay and the impact that they make within your company. So imagine you and I meet, and I invite you over, or we're talking, and I'm like, yeah, I raise chickens and I make fresh bread and all of these things are really cool. And you're like, oh man, I dig her vibe. I totally want to hang out. And I invite you over to my house. And we are planning this for weeks. In fact, we're texting and everything is great. And I'm so excited. And I'm telling you how many eggs my chickens are laying. And I tell you, I just learned this new bread recipe. We have the date ready. And on the date that you are headed to my home, you had your outfit already picked out. Y'all remember that first day of school, having that outfit like all ready to go. And you show up to my house. Oh, let me back up. You have told everyone that you have met this human that raises chickens and makes fresh bread, and you cannot wait to meet and hang out even further. So you show up to my house, you do that friendly knock. Do y'all know the shave and a haircut knock? Let's see if my mic picks it up. It's that's the friendly knock, in case y'all didn't know. Anytime you knock on someone's door, you want to do the friendly knock. So you knock on the door and nothing happens. So you do the friendly knock again. Still nothing. Then you decide to ring the doorbell. I'm not going to make the doorbell noise. And then you hear some shuffling. And I get to the front door. I open it. I look a hot mess. Look like I just woke up. You can tell I haven't showered. And my house is dark. And it just has a little bit of a smell to it. I open the door, say what's up, and go back and lay long ways on the couch and just wait for you to come in. What did I just do? I just created a really non-welcoming experience and something that you've been looking forward to for a while. Believe it or not, employees, that's the same vibe and experience that employees feel. Come in, the eggs are boiled and cold. The bread, you can tell, it's been sitting out for a while and it's kind of stale. What are you going to do? How are you going to feel? It's not the experience that you want. So again, when you look at the onboarding and look at the welcoming, think of those in two components, and both need their own individual attention to create an experience for your people to feel connected. Okay. I'm going to move on to leadership because I have, like I mentioned, there's the key thing that your culture needs. And I have seen, no matter how much work the culture requires, that these things are possible. It can turn a company and a culture around. So I would say, I mean, the hiring part is good. The welcoming on part, onboarding part is good. I have no idea where your culture is currently, but if leadership is needing some work, this is where you want to start. So the big thing the culture is always looking for and checking on is trust and safety. Those are non-negotiables for the culture. The culture cannot grow and thrive without either one. So I'm going to give you the two components that build trust. Fail safe. These are the two things that build trust inevitably. Like it just does. I'm not going to say that they're easy to do, but once they are done, it is absolutely trust for the culture. So here are the two things to build trust. And if you're not in leadership and you want to build trust, let's say you're starting a new relationship, or you have a team that you're managing, or you you have a friendship that you're cultivating, this works as well. Here are the two things. One, doing what you say you are going to do consistently. This might sound very simple, but it's very true. Doing what you say you're going to do consistently. The culture craves consistency. It likes to be able to anticipate how it's going to evolve. For example, let's say we are going to drive somewhere and we get in the car, we know where our destination is, we're kind of, we're clear, we might take a couple pit stops, and the person driving is stopping erratically, changing lanes, just sporadically, just driving in a way that's not necessarily safe and doesn't really show much trust. What are we going to do? We're going to question, like, do we even really want to go on this destination? What is this person doing? And these are questions you don't want your culture to be asking. So doing what you say you're going to do consistently helps eliminate any questions around the culture, around if they can trust you as a leadership. The second thing is even bigger. And I don't know if it's hard or easy in relationship to where you might be on your journey, but it is showing that you care about others outside of your sphere of influence. So I'll say this one more time. Showing that you care about others outside your sphere of influence. So the culture is always listening about how and who you're talking to and how you're talking about them. You might be in a bundle of leadership, and if you talk negatively about your team or your staff or your people, there are people in that culture or in that leadership group that aren't going to feel safe or trust you, even if they commiserate with you. So being mindful of how you show and show care for others is really key. It's how you talk about a competitor CEO. It's how you talk about um, the unhoused person down the street. It's how you talk about yourself, how you talk about other coworkers. It's how you talk about certain things that are going on in the news or in our world. It's how you treat the person that is waiting on you when you are going out to lunch. Those are all cues for the culture. And I'm not saying you have to be perfect. Well, that's basically impossible. I'm not saying you need to have perfection within your culture, but if you can do those two things and admit when you have not set the bar in those areas to your culture, that is how you build the culture's trust. When you have the culture's trust, it will do whatever you ask of it. That is a huge thing there. So around leadership, that is the one takeaway I want to give, because there's tons of stuff around culture and leadership out there. I found these two things to be very instrumental and key to navigating culture. All right, let's move on to appreciation, y'all. And if y'all have any questions, again, drop them in the chat. Happy to answer them in real time, or you can wait till after in the Q&A. Appreciation. So I'm not sure if y'all have heard of the 5 love languages, but there are also those 5 love languages translate into the 5 appreciation languages. So the love languages are for relationships and intimacy, and the appreciation languages are for the workplace appreciation. And they're all pretty much the same. The 5 appreciation languages are acts of service, quality time, words of affirmation, gifts, and touch. Now, touch, I want to just say, is fist bumps, high fives, proximity, things like that. Nothing inappropriate. And so, since we all have our preferred ways of being appreciated, finding out what your culture's appreciation language is going to be key. It's going to help with how you navigate and communicate with the culture. It's going to build out some of the communication strategies that you use. For example, if you find out that you have a culture that's mostly consisting of words of appreciation, you want to make sure that the things that you say and the things that you communicate, so written or otherwise, are in alignment with that. So if you have or let me even break it down further. If you have an employee or someone that is words of appreciation, you want to be mindful of the words that you are using with them, because that is how they receive appreciation. And the opposite is true. It's also how they retain some of the information that's being said to them. So you want to be mindful of being assertive, and also really good at giving constructive feedback when needed. So for individuals, I would create a simple flow, knowing that that's their appreciation language. So if I have an employee that, let's name this employee Bob. If I have Bob and his appreciation language is gifts, and every time Bob does a really good job, I just give Bob words of affirmation. And some time has passed, and Bob does a survey or shares with me in a 360, I don't feel appreciated at work. And if ego creeps in as the manager, I'm like, what do you mean you don't feel appreciated, Bob? I've been appreciating you in this entire time. Well, I haven't been speaking Bob's language, appreciation language. And it would have been just as simple as to say, oh, Bob's appreciation language is gifts. And don't think it's always about money when it comes to gifts. Sometimes it can just be a note. It could be sometimes, oh, I'm bringing you back one of your favorite coffees, or it could be something that you made for them. There's a wide range into appreciation language, but knowing what your people's appreciation language allows them to get to feel more engaged, to feel more connected, to want to be more productive, to want to be more efficient, and to do the things that are being asked of them. But it really starts with appreciation. So if you've been using the word engagement, I'd ask you to taper it back and just think about appreciation. Okay. So I covered the 4. Does anyone have any questions about these 4 pillars, or anything stand out to you around what I said? Go ahead and drop it in the chat, and I can address it as we continue. Just take some time, and I wish I had a little bit of music to just, even though I'm a fan of awkward silence or just silence. What are the 5 words? Okay, so the 5 appreciation languages are words of affirmation. So I'll break that down even further. It's this person receives or feels appreciated when positive words or words are spoken to them of positive nature. So words of affirmation could be like, you just did an amazing job on that project. That person, if their words of affirmation, they are going to light up. They are going to light up. The other side of it is the opposite is also true. If you say, couldn't you have done better on that project? That is really going to bring them down. So if you do have to give criticism to someone that is words of affirmation, I'd highly recommend doing it in a constructive and mindful way. So instead of what was wrong, what went on with that project, can you walk me through how this project went? There were some areas that I had a few concerns on, and then go into it from there. One thing around words of affirmation, a resource that I'd love for you all to look at is called the Leader Phrase Book. This Leader Phrase Book is something that I use throughout a lot of the stuff that I do and through some of the coaching with the executive and leadership teams. It helps you navigate the right words and how to say them and how to practice saying them. So it's called the Leader Phrase Book. I have some resources that I will share at the end, but the Leader Phrase Book is huge and very, very helpful. So words of affirmation, quality time. This means that this person likes to spend quality time with someone. So if you have someone that's quality time and you're on your phone all the time, they don't feel appreciated. Or if sometimes a little bit of time goes a long way, where you're just like, let's go grab a coffee, or let's do they tend to like to do team building events or be a part of things. Quality time is a big thing for them. Let's see, words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service. That one's my appreciation language, and love language. So taking it out of appreciation for a second, and I'll bring it into personal. When my husband takes out the trash and I don't have to tell him to do it or say like, wait for him to do it or start to do it myself, I feel really loved. Like he sees that something needs to be done. He knows I have other things going on and he goes ahead and takes care of it. Acts of service is a really big one. Gifts. So this person receives appreciation through gifts. And again, it doesn't always have to be monetary or something that you are buying. It could be something you make. It could be a note. It could be something, and this is where I do have an appreciation guide. Maybe I'll share that with y'all. But there's that. And then touch. So like I mentioned earlier, touch is fist bumps, hugs, high fives, proximity. So you might find someone that is the way that they sit. So body language is really big. It doesn't necessarily mean touch in an inappropriate or a non-welcoming way. So I want to clarify that. So those are the 5 5 appreciation languages within the workplace. And there is a book that is out called The 5 Appreciation Languages, and it breaks it down even further. It gives you a guide and all that other stuff as well. Okay, so now I want to talk to you about the last pillar. That's the biggest one, the biggest pillar here. And I don't even know if I need to share my screen to do this, but I'm just going to say it out loud. The biggest pillar for the culture is humanity. Culture is where the people come to gather in business. And humans, again, are the variable. Humanity is so key. So I've shared earlier that business is linear, humans are lunar. And humanity happens to have that dichotomy of light and dark. So we have a good side to our humanity and we have a not so good side to our humanity. And so what we practice with our humanity is who we will show up in the workplace. And one big takeaway that I want to share with you is that it is free to be kind with our humanity. And that makes a big difference in the workplace. And so when we think about how we're navigating the humans in the workplace, utilizing our humanity to do so makes a big difference. Not enough strategics in the world will make up for the ounce of humanity that would create the ripples in which we want to see. So that is what I have for you today in humanity in the workplace, culture, and tribe. But wait, there's more. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly as I'm wrapping up. I have a few gifts for you. So, in order for you to get these gifts, I want you to bring out your phone and scan this QR code. It is going to take you to a site, and I want to gift you with um, a business tarot session and it explains everything there. I want to gift you with this simple 8 steps to simple change management. And I also want to gift you with a culture strategy conversation. If you're planning your culture in 2022, I want to help. My tribe wants to help. Let our humans help your humans, and let's just have a great conversation. So go ahead and scan this code. It will take you to your gifts, and you can utilize them however and whenever you want. This is for you. Thank you for being here with me. I'm going to stop sharing so you can see my face, or I can see that I'm talking to you. Thank you so much for being here with me. I am sending you light, love, and gratitude. Have a great rest of your day. And if you have any questions, let me know. You can reach me through that site as well.
Cherise, what a great presentation. Oh my God, I was on that journey with you. The pillars were so fascinating to me. I'm thinking about like our onboarding culture here at Capital Factory and how we've onboarded virtually for the last year and a half. And I'm like taking notes, and it was a really great presentation. Thank you so much for this gift. I just scanned it and signed up. Thank you again. It was really lovely. The chat was really active. So we'll see you at the happy hour if you can make it tonight at Central Machine Works at 5 o'clock.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. This session is called Demystifying Inclusion's 9 Focus Areas for Measurable Impact. Inclusion can be tricky because it has a lot to do with how people feel, how they experience and interact with others, and their sense of belonging within your organization. We're going to bring up Arshia to the stage, and she's going to kick us off. Arshia, welcome.
Thank you. And I'm actually joined by my colleague Lisa as well.
Perfect. Welcome, Lisa. I'll get out of the way here. Y'all have a great session.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you.
We're so glad to have you here. And we'll go ahead and get our slides up and jump right in. We have a lot of content to cover in the next 45 or so minutes. And so we won't delay at all, other than to say, we welcome any questions along the way. So feel free to chat or send them our way, or to reach out to us after this session if there's anything further you'd like to discuss that we end up not having time to cover. A little bit about us as an organization. We have been in this space measuring inclusion for about 4 years now. And so I myself am co-founder and CEO of Alleria. And as you see, I'm joined by Arshia Malik, who is also co-founder and really heads up all of our client success and operations, and make sure that we're focused on the people and impact that matters in our organization. And so the both of us are passionate about this work and excited to be bringing it to you today. Now, more specifically as an organization, Alleria is focused on measuring inclusion and pinpointing exactly where business leaders and organizations themselves can focus to drive greater employee satisfaction, greater diversity, greater inclusion, and ultimately greater business performance. Now, we can't do all of that in today's session, but what we'll aim to do is really introduce you to our framework for understanding inclusion. We'll highlight what we've been able to learn so far in doing this work and measuring inclusion in the workplace with our clients. And we're going to point you to specific tips that you can take with you today to drive greater inclusion within your organizations, whether those are small startups and you're just getting started, or very large organizations. And so I hope that you've got your pen ready to take notes, because we'll be throwing a lot at you. But as a good place to start, I think that it's important to really touch on inclusion and how we're thinking and defining inclusion. A lot of times in this space, in the HR tech space, in the diversity, equity, inclusion, justice space, we're seeing that folks use acronyms, DEI, D&I, IND. We're recently seeing JEDI come across a lot. So these acronyms can be really powerful and helpful But at the same time, it can often hide the fact that these are very different concepts and very different needs and approaches to doing the work. And so, while diversity in itself, can tell you things like representation of your organization, or give you a sense of the representation within your organization, inclusion is really looking to go a bit deeper. And so we define inclusion as the act of ensuring that people's experiences within an organization are not impacted negatively as a result of your personal characteristics. And so inclusion is really about those experiences and moments that are occurring on a day-to-day basis as everyone is working towards those same goals within your organization. And so a lot of times when we begin this work, when organizations look to say, like, we'd really like to prioritize diversity and inclusion, we often see that a first step might be some sort of survey, right? And that's probably pretty common. And those surveys might include questions like these. You might see something that's saying, hey, on a scale of 1 to 5, how included do you feel in your organization? Right? How many of you have seen that question come across or have answered that question before? Probably very many of you. It's a very common employee engagement question. We often find that those surveys will also include questions like this one, like, how satisfied are you in your current role? And it'll give you a scale of, either I'm very satisfied to very unsatisfied, or a scale of 1 to 5, depending on how the survey is formatted, but also a very common question around satisfaction, right? And you may also find very specific questions that are trying to get at what's possible in terms of change. So we might see, statements like this, like, how much do you agree with this statement? I feel like my manager supports my growth and needs. And this is meant to say, like, is this something that we need to specifically work on, right? So I'd like you to think about these questions. Have you answered these questions? Let's say, across your organization, you've had the opportunity to take an engagement survey or a satisfaction survey or a DEI survey, and it's included information like this. The challenge that we have with this approach, particularly as a starting point, is that I'd like you to also consider, let's say on a scale of 1 to 5, oftentimes we'll do polls and kind of see how you all land in each of these. But, let's say that I answer these questions and I'm on a scale of 1 to 5, I'm a 4. How satisfied? I'm going to say I'm satisfied on that 5-point scale. And I'm going to say I agree, not strongly agree, but just agree with this statement, right? But what does that actually tell you? Like, what do you do with that information? As an organization, we kind of just say, like, okay, now what, right? And so oftentimes we see organizations, or we come into organizations who have conducted these initial surveys, but based on the answers, they're still not clear on what they can do or where they should focus or how they can truly make a difference in their organization. And so today we're really going to look at how we're trying to shift that initial approach, how we're trying to bring clarity to where you can focus in your organization to truly drive greater inclusion on a day-to-day basis. And so one of the places that we like to start, and something that's just helpful to contextualize how we look at inclusion, how we measure inclusion ultimately, is through an analogy. And this analogy is one with health. And so I'd like you to think about health in terms of how you're feeling today. When I started this workshop and introduced myself and introduced Arshia, I didn't say anything along the lines of like, hey, y'all, I'm Lisa, I'm feeling great today. It didn't come out of my mouth because it's not actually top of mind right now. But if I wasn't feeling well, I might have mentioned it just so that you had a heads up. But also that's natural because I am thinking about it because it's top of mind to me. When you aren't feeling well, when you aren't in good health, it is top of mind. And folks with, let's say, a chronic illness, they spend a good amount of their day thinking about their health, whereas someone who is generally pretty healthy may not think about it at all. And just the same, when we're thinking about inclusion, we tend to think about inclusion when we don't have it, when we're feeling excluded. So we're noticing it because of its absence, much like health. And just to take this analogy one step further, as it relates to health, consider someone with celiac disease as an example. And, if you have the privilege of not having celiac challenges, you may look at a menu when you're at a restaurant and think, oh yeah, like, look, there's plenty of options for folks who can't have gluten, just don't eat the bread. I think that's a very common response, right? But those folks with Celiacs might say like, yeah, they're looking at the menu very differently. They're saying, oh, experience has taught them, like, I can't make that assumption. I actually have to look at all of the ingredients. I have to figure out, like, was this cooked in the same fryer as other food that does have gluten? What is the risks that I'm taking by ordering certain menu items, right? And that's a super complex story, but really just to make the point that the folks that have that personal experience with the condition are generally the best people to speak to what they can and can't do safely, like what will or will not cause them risks, what is the best way for them to navigate that scenario. Well, in the workplace, the logic stands as it relates to employee experiences. So one of the reasons this work can be so unclear and challenging is because inclusion is actually invisible, particularly to those who enjoy it the most. So if you are a white, cishet, fully enabled business leader, you may not see the problematic aspects of your processes and your procedures and policies in your workplace. And you probably can't really point to the day-to-day experiences that are causing folks in your organization to feel excluded because they aren't impacting you. And so we just highlight this in this analogy as saying, like, its absence is most difficult to notice for those who are included on a day-to-day basis. And we'll take this analogy just one step further. You see the graph or the image over to the side of this slide. It's one of those forms that every time we go to the doctor's office, we have to fill out, this stack of forms and collect all this data. And there's a bit of brilliance in this process, though, because they're asking you to identify what are the symptoms you've been facing? What are the actual experiences that collectively are causing you to be here in the doctor's office today, right? And the point in this is that the doctor is able to take those collection of symptoms and understand how to diagnose you and how to craft a custom treatment plan, if we will, for your experience. And so we're looking to do the exact same thing in organizations. We're looking to uncover those specific symptoms that people might be experiencing in your organization so that we can determine where to focus to really drive meaningful change. So, but those symptoms in this work aren't a fever necessarily, hopefully. The symptoms are really things that are experiences of exclusion, those moments that are causing folks to feel excluded on a day-to-day basis. And so what we're capturing are experiences of exclusion specifically, so moments that have caused folks to feel excluded. And then we're organizing them in this framework, the categories of inclusion that we've developed. And so this allows us to not only identify and understand what are the common trends or types of experiences that are causing folks to feel excluded on a day-to-day basis? What are the types of barriers that exist? And how does that differ across various diversity metrics, right? Or various identity metrics across the organization? But also it helps us focus organizations on specific intentional outcomes. So if you can imagine with me for a moment, we've got 9 categories here: access and participation, skills, use and assignments, learning and growth, compensation and benefits, career opportunities, work-life balance, recognition, respect, and workplace interactions, right? So let's say with learning and growth, there are some folks in the organization that are saying, I really don't feel like I have access to the training programs that everyone else has access to, or I don't understand how I'm going to grow within this role. And I'd like to learn these skills, but don't have access to that training, right? Well, the organization themselves can take that feedback and say, great, as a goal in our diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, we are going to make sure that folks are more equitably provided access to learning and growth opportunities. And here's how we're going to do that, right? And so they can be more intentional and focused in those efforts and be able to drive quantifiable change. Now, I'm going to hand it off to Arshia now so that she can go into more of these categories and really give you a sense of what we're seeing in our work as we're capturing these experiences of exclusion, statistics that we're coming across, but also specific tips in each of these categories. But with the quick note and caveat that we won't have time to go into all 9 of them. So we will make sure that you have access to resources at the end. Arshia, I'm going to pass it off to you here.
Awesome. Thank you. My subtitle should be working now. It was hearing Lisa chatting and thinking it was background noise. Right, so as Lisa just shared a bit about our framework and why we're focusing on inclusion, I'm going to dig into the framework a little bit more and actually talk through about 5 of these categories here, share why they're important, why we're including them in our framework for measuring inclusion, how they're tied to inclusion, and then also share a little bit about the types of experiences we're seeing, just to give you all kind of an idea of what folks are experiencing, what they're saying about this, and then we'll show you how we're actually measuring it as well. All right, so let's dig into access and participation first. So first off, these 2 statistics here are actually from other studies that we haven't done, again, showing why this category is so important. So one report says that companies that prioritize disability inclusion have 28% higher revenue and double the net income as those that don't. Another report finds that 35% of employees actually meet with their manager at least once a month, and 12% never do. So 2 totally different parts of access and participation, showing you though that both of these are super important to the employee experience at work as it relates to this category. With regards to what we're actually getting from folks when we collect experiences of exclusion, that is how we measure inclusion, here are 2 examples. So I have felt excluded when corporate videos and training materials don't include closed captioning and subtitles. And because I work in a satellite location, I sometimes don't get access to resources and opportunities. The first one, as you can see here, Lisa and I have been using subtitles. If you don't already use them easily, PowerPoint has it already built in for free. You can just turn it on and they're just there whenever you're talking and you're presenting. So highly suggest and recommend that. And the second one, we're actually going to talk about that in some tips right now. So a few tips which you all can consider as you think about access and participation within your own organizations. And importantly, you'll note that these don't require a large budget. So the first one, consider accessibility in both in-person and virtual spaces. Accessibility in person means literally things like, is it handicap accessible? Are you creating spaces where everyone can participate? In virtual spaces, is there color contrast in your website? Is there alt text? Are there captions or ASL interpreters, whether it's online or in person? Things like that, really thinking about that as you're putting on events within your own organization, things like that. Inclusive meetings where all can participate. Meetings are consistently a large source of exclusion across the board in every single client we've ever worked with. And that makes sense, right? It's a place where we're all interacting with each other, we're talking to each other. And what often happens is we actually talk over each other, or folks don't feel like they can participate because they aren't the loudest in the room typically, or they're introverts and they tend to take more time to respond and give feedback. One idea that we see work well is having folks circulate meeting agendas the day before or a few hours before, so people have time to come to think on them and come to the meeting with thoughts. Additionally, you can circulate notes after the meeting before action items have been decided, and give some folks some more time to provide additional ideas. Third here is proximity bias. This relates to that second experience of exclusion we just talked about. So with hybrid work and async work and remote work that's happening all over the world, proximity bias is a real problem. There's research out there that shows that folks that have more engagement with their managers in person or are at the same office as their managers are more likely to get promotions or raises. And so we really have to be careful about how proximity bias might be showing up in our organizations unintentionally or not. And then lastly here, prioritizing inclusion of all identities at events. These are things like making sure you're considerate of folks' dietary needs, having non-alcoholic options at events, and not making all the language around an event focused on a drinking culture of alcohol. So just these small things can make a big difference when it comes to access and participation. Moving along to career opportunities. This is an interesting one that has a lot to do with career development, promotions, things like that. So one report finds that 77% of employees feel like they're on their own in terms of career development in their company. Another finds that promotion to a managerial role increases job satisfaction as much as a 60% pay and increase does. a pay increase does. So two parts of that right here, right? So on one hand, folks feel like they're on their own, they're not feeling supported, and that they can really achieve their career goals within their organizations. On the other hand, you can actually make a significant impact on folks just by giving them more responsibility, making them feel more ownership in their organization and their role. What we're getting when we work with our clients and their employees, things like it feels like there's no space for upward growth because senior leadership is exclusively white. So they're looking up and seeing themselves not represented. And so the assumption is that they don't really have a forward path here. Second, I was overlooked for a promotion and it was given to someone with less experience than me. I was told that they were a good fit, but also they were the same race and gender as leaders at that level. A similar thing here, but goes further in that even the reasoning that they give is unclear and hard to believe for the person that was experiencing that. A few tips on career opportunities: clear and transparent promotion processes. Even if you are not meaning to be biased in any way and you truly are working on having super unbiased and equitable promotion criteria and policies, if you don't have it clearly laid out and documented and accessible by all your employees, it can lead to these uncomfortable conversations, perceptions of unfairness when things go awry. So if you have the clear and transparent processes documented, it allows for clearer conversations. It allows for folks knowing where they stand and reducing those perceptions. Second, mentoring. Going beyond that, mentoring is really helpful and awesome for so many folks, but really increasingly it's clear that we have to go beyond that to actually sponsoring folks. And by that, it's advocating for them when they're not in the room. If you are someone's sponsor, put their name in for an open position that you think they'd be good at, but you know they're going to be looked over for. Bring them up for key learning and growth initiatives and things like that. Third, start tracking mobility. This goes beyond diversity statistics at the team level or at the department level, but really looking at who is moving up, who is not moving up, and who are you actually losing. Those statistics, when you break it down by demographic data, can at least start pointing you in the direction of where you need to dig further, where bias may be taking place, again, unconscious or not. And lastly here, thoughtfully balanced internal and external hires. There's interesting research that we shared recently that was done that found that internal candidates, so folks that want to apply for a promotion within the organization or even a lateral move, when they get rejected, it increases their chance of quitting significantly, more than the folks that never even applied to begin with. And so when you're looking to fill an open position, think about whether you do have qualified folks internally that you can consider. And when folks apply, really actually give them a real chance. Don't go in just assuming you're going to be hiring someone else, and it's just a kind of performative piece. Next is work-life balance, certainly a big one in the past year and a half at this point, almost 2. 76% of global employees want flexibility in where they work, and 93% want flexibility in when they work. And then 27% of remote employees cited not being able to unplug as their biggest struggle with remote work. So again, it shows these two parts of it. There's an increased demand for flexibility that is super clear in every single article you read these days about work and people management. But at the same time, people are struggling with burnout, mental health issues, and we are still figuring out this transition for how we can have a more balanced and holistic life. A couple of experiences we received. My peers often deprioritize my opinion when scheduling meetings. They seem to assume that because I don't have children, I have a lot more free time and flexibility. Interestingly, we get a lot of experiences regarding folks that are not caregivers and their expectations put on them. Second, as a salaried employee, I'm expected to work anytime, day, night, or weekends. So some tips on that. Walk the talk on flexibility. By that, we really mean don't just say you support flexibility or you care about flexibility, but write down a flexibility process, document it, make it clear, ensure your employees know what they have access to, what sorts of things they can take on or take advantage of in order to do the things that they need in their lives. Additionally, including wellness and employee feedback. So when you're checking with your employees, either one-on-ones or quarterly reviews, whatever that looks like for you all, ask them about their mental health, their needs, ask them about what they may need in order to feel more productive at work, as well as take care of their lives outside of work. I'll give you some really good insight by asking them directly. Having clear norms for communication. This is, again, super important. We are all very used to responding to every email, every Slack message, every text for those who text for work-related things or just not work-related things. Having clear norms and guidelines for communication can be super helpful. I've recently started using Slack scheduling tools, so you can actually schedule messages for folks. Just because I'm working late doesn't mean my colleague needs to be, right? I'm in a different time zone right now, so I'm definitely aware of that. Sometimes I'm sending messages when it's the middle of the night for Lisa, for example. So I do want to be careful of things like that. We can also schedule emails. There's a bunch of things you can do, including the words urgent or not urgent in email subject. Lots of small things that make a difference. And lastly, remember flexibility is important to all employees. Like the experience we just shared, consider how you're taking care of caregivers and providing them their flexibility, but also think about folks in different stages of their life that have different needs. So when you're putting together a flex policy, you need to really look at your entire organization and see what the different needs are and how you can customize it to them. Recognition, super important. Every single employee wants to feel recognized and valued in the organization that they work in. At companies with a strong culture of recognition, 87% of employees feel included, or they say they feel included. And increasing the frequency of recognition rituals led to a 31% decrease in absenteeism and a 27% increase in performance. These are really significant statistics and numbers that show the power of recognition at work. But we get a lot of experiences of exclusion tied to recognition. So one is my particular personality type, introverted and analytical, receives less recognition than more outgoing and assertive individuals. And on a call with leadership, my manager took all the credit for work I had done and only thanked me privately afterwards. If any of you have experienced things like this, these are pretty common, right? Or witness things like this. We all work differently, we all experience things differently, and therefore we all need different sorts of recognition and to be valued. So some tips, give credit where it's due for that first experience or the second one as well. We need to be able to give credit to the person that actually made the point or gave the idea or did the work, not the person that spoke the loudest or the longest or the most in the meetings. And meetings are actually a significant place where this happens. And sometimes it's truly unintentional. We're just in the flow of meetings, we're all brainstorming, and somehow one person's idea kind of just gets lost in the mix and someone else brings it up later. So it's really helpful to have someone designated as the person that's kind of watching this. You can kind of round robin this for each session and have that individual take note of who is saying what. You don't have to stop a conversation every single time an interruption is made, but make sure that you do find a right pause to divert back to that original person that made that point and give them that credit and say, great, that was an awesome idea. I know we've been building on top of that. Just want to acknowledge that for a moment. That can, again, make a big difference. Make recognition ongoing and personal. Make recognition something you do not just in performance reviews or not just in kind of a one-on-one just with your manager. Give it the opportunity to happen ongoing, have peer-to-peer recognition. And also what's really important is having folks that you don't directly work with recognize you, right? And it's really easy to get siloed in your own department or your own team, but find a way to have it be personal to what they're doing and make everyone aware of it. And that leads to the third one, tie each role to the mission. Just because someone isn't client-facing or the one that's tied to revenue generation or whatever that may be for your organization doesn't mean they're not playing an integral role in making sure the organization is successful. So each employee should understand for themselves how their role ties to the mission and how their role leads to the mission, the success of the organization and the achievement of the mission. Making that clear as part of conversations, as part of their onboarding is super important and helpful for them acknowledging their own value each day at work. Lastly, this is a really interesting initiative we're seeing more and more of is flipping the status quo, and that's reverse mentorships. We have a lot to learn from folks that report up to us as much as we, can get used to just being the folks that are telling them what to do. If you flip the status quo, have a reverse mentor, that's having someone that reports up to you be the person that's kind of in charge. It shows you what they're doing, what their day-to-day is like. And beyond giving them that sense of ownership and value, it also can provide you with a lot of interesting insight in the sorts of things that are happening day to day and challenges they may be facing. I have one more for you, and this is why we're just doing 5 because it can take a little bit, is workplace interactions. This one is a really big one because we're always interacting with each other in the workplace. But in general, 68% of people of color are on guard against bias and unfair treatment at work. That's a huge number. And 52% of women have reported experiencing microaggressions or harassment in the past year. Couple of experiences of exclusion here. I'm often asked to speak about different cultural events and experiences, even when I am not from that culture. I feel this is because I am the only non-white person on the leadership team. Second, my peers frequently make jokes about how young I am, even though I have management responsibilities. It impacts the customer's perception of me. So 2 really disrespectful and difficult experiences to have. And those really both are microaggressions in a lot of ways, right? And they're macroaggressions too, but often these things show up as microaggressions. So providing training regarding them is really important, having folks understand what they look like, because at the end of the day, the vast majority of microaggressions are unintentional or come from a subconscious bias space. Supporting the de-biasing of language. This is something folks are doing increasingly in a lot of organizations, changing gendered language to gender neutral language, like using partner or spouse, things like that. Thinking about ableist language. There's a whole bunch of resources out there that provide entire glossaries of the things to watch out for and how you can shift them. Third, fostering a culture of psychological safety. This really supports the ability to calling out bias and microaggressions in the workplace without a fear of retaliation, and creates a space where folks can have these sorts of uncomfortable conversations in a better way. It's a difficult thing to do. Folks can get defensive, or folks can feel like, hey, I didn't mean it that way. But fostering a culture of having these kinds of conversations and creating space to bring these things up can be really helpful. And lastly, having a clear code of conduct. Just documenting a code of conduct by itself is, I would say, super important. It shows your employees what's expected, what's absolutely not allowed, and what could happen, or what avenues folks that are victims of microaggressions or bias or discrimination have if these things occur. It's also really important to actually put together a code of conduct with the advice and the input from a diverse set of voices, so that you are considering all experiences and ideas for this. And we can also really include a bunch of resources. Our code of conduct, for example, includes a bunch of resources for our employees to review. So those are the 9 categories of inclusion, or there are 5 of them. The other 4, we have them as well. Again, as Lisa mentioned, we'll be sending you some resources afterwards that you can dig into more of this stuff. But with that, I will pass it back over to Lisa to walk you through wrapping up and how we use this data.
Thank you. I know that was a lot of information. It's like stats, examples, tasks. And we hope that was able to be processed as like very helpful and useful to you. If you need a bit more time to digest, like we said, we have resources for you. We'll point you here shortly and how to get those. But I'd like to just take a minute to let you understand a bit better how we use that information. In each of those categories that Arshia introduced, she specifically provided 2 experiences of exclusion that we've been able to capture in that category. And those are experiences of exclusion that we have actually captured from employees of our client organizations. And so as you might imagine, when we are conducting inclusion assessments and helping organizations figure out how to measure inclusion within their organizations, that is the first step, or one of the first steps, is we're looking to understand, from employees, what are the moments that are causing you to feel excluded in this organization? And we capture that data using proprietary technology. But just to give you an insight into what that means and how it takes shape, very first off is we're going to collect anonymously information around their identity. So each employee will share information, not their name, not their email address, but we might ask them questions around like race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, whether you have a visible or invisible disability, or both or neither, age and brackets, how many years have you been at the company? What department are you in? Or what location are you working in? And like, what's your general sense of satisfaction? These are pretty common data points that we'll collect from each employee, but again, fully anonymously, because we're looking to just understand how that impacts the actual experiences as opposed to what are the number of experiences that this person is reporting. The next process is really capturing those specific moments of exclusion from employees. And so in this example, you can see that we're sharing, like, I'm often interrupted or talked over in meetings. And even in the examples that Arshia was providing, she mentioned a couple that relate to meetings, and we see this often. So I imagine many of you have had this feeling before, have had this moment of exclusion, and could share it if we were conducting this assessment with your organization. But importantly, when the employee types that experience of exclusion, it is in their own words. So they're describing it to us, and those words are very powerful in our process. But beyond describing that specific experience of exclusion, they're also able to categorize it in our framework, the categories of inclusion, the things that we've been talking about today. And so they'll say, yeah, this experience happened, and it really relates to, perhaps in this example, skills use in assignments because they're not valuing my opinion in that moment, and maybe respect or recognition, depending on how they're feeling and what they felt was the result of this experience of exclusion. Importantly, we also ask the source. So who or what in that organization in this moment is causing this individual to feel excluded? And so that might be their direct manager or their peers or the customer, whoever it might be in that moment. And that allows us to start looking at the data in a way that's similar to this. And this is a very big table and a very small slide, but you can start to get a sense of what we're trying to do here. So we have the categories of inclusion across the left, we have the sources across the top. And so then each individual cell is giving us a sense of, in the cross of this experience or this category with this source, what are we seeing in terms of the number of experiences of exclusion shared? And wherever we're seeing the biggest numbers is where we're really going to start to dial in to start. It's like, this is the opportunity, like this is a lot of exclusion. What can we do right here in this cell to drive change in this organization? And so, at a quick glance here, I'm seeing like respect and leadership is 423. That is a very big number. Or even respect and peers is 329. That is a very big number in the context of this grid. So in our technology, we would dig into that and say, okay, what's happening here as it relates to respect and leadership? Are we seeing a discrepancy or a difference in experience when we start to compare folks of different identities comparative to the normative majority? And we start to get a deeper story of what's possible in the organization and where the organization should really focus. And so that's just a quick glimpse at, like, through our technology, what we're seeing and how we're navigating this data so that we can get to the end result of really that focused resource and quantifiable change in the organization. But really quickly to wrap up, one of the things that we like to kind of leave folks on is this idea that we really, truly, strongly believe from a result of our work and our research and being in organizations measuring inclusion, that it is inclusion that leads to increased diversity and increased business performance. And so we really like to highlight the benefits of focusing on inclusion and measuring it in this way. And what it really does is it unlocks opportunity. It provides employees the opportunity to confidentially share their experiences in a way that's safe. And that detailed understanding of specific situations allows us as a third party to help the organization identify specific opportunities for targeted initiatives. And the interesting thing about diversity and inclusion is that, diversity with representation metrics, it's only going to really shift as you're hiring and firing as an organization. The makeup of your organization can't change without the change of actual humans. Whereas inclusion can be changed on a day-to-day basis, that sense of inclusion, right? And so we can measure it much more frequently and demonstrate immediate impact. But one other thing that's really important with inclusion is that it doesn't matter how big your organization is, or whether or not you're all remote, or whether you're a global organization, whether it's 5 people or 5,000 people, what industry, and all these details end up not mattering because we can all make a difference as it relates to inclusion, both at the company level, but also what you may have noticed is that these experiences of exclusion aren't a result of just culture, aren't a result of just like a company. It's a result of individual interactions between people. And we often we have actually a blog post out and some research out that in summary, basically says that it's people, not policy, that is causing folks to feel excluded. It's people, it's these interactions that we're having on a day-to-day basis that's really driving that feeling of exclusion or a lack of inclusion. And so with that, I'd like to take a moment to just really ask you all a question. And to the extent you're comfortable, feel free to drop things in chat. But if nothing else, just think for this moment, what is one thing you can do to really make someone, just one person, feel more included in your workplace tomorrow? Like one thing you can do to make just one person feel a little bit more included tomorrow. And I'm gonna give you a second to think on that. And a lot of times I wish I could engage with you in chat and see all the answers and read them out to you. But a lot of times what we're finding is that, we start to realize that small things make a big difference. Things like listening, things like asking people how they're doing, things like making sure that folks get recognition for their contribution. If you see someone getting interrupted, moving the conversation back to them. These small behaviors and awareness can really make a difference in the day-to-day experiences of your workplace and of your peers around you. And so we would challenge and encourage you today to just come into each day with this question: what's one thing I can do to make one person feel more included? And I can guarantee you that if all of us did this on a daily basis, we wouldn't be standing where we are today, struggling to move the needle as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then just finally, we've mentioned a few times, we have a lot of resources for you, and we'd love to share them with you. A couple of things, we have workshops that are specifically targeted to startups. Actually, it's run through our nonprofit more specifically, but if you're interested in having this conversation or introducing these conversations into your startup, or learning as an entrepreneur how you can really embed diversity, equity, and inclusion into the core of your business from day one, we'd love to point you to those workshops. We have a book an ebook that talks about how and why we measure inclusion and goes into the details of this framework. Happy to share that with you. Each week, Arshia publishes a newsletter on Tuesdays, and that newsletter is followed by thousands of folks and is an incredible resource if you're looking to stay on top of trends and resources and events that relate to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then more specifically, we have a couple of blog posts that really talk about why the needle isn't moving, things that people are doing that aren't working, and why we see that that needle, how it can be moved differently. And so we'll point you to those blog posts. We can also point you to resources that further dive into tips and tricks of each of these categories. Okay, that was a lot of information, but here's the URL you need. So if you want to just take a quick note, write this down, pull it up in a separate tab. You can share your information with us, and then we'll share this information with you. But you can always find us at alleria.tech as well. So Arshia, did I miss anything? You want to jump in here?
That's great. No, thanks, Lisa. I'm just making sure that the URL gets put in the chat for you all. Again, try to make it as clear as possible, but do please let us know if you're interested, or if you have any questions or anything like that. We'd love to connect. I do want to just acknowledge that we have a couple of questions here that we can really quickly in the last couple of minutes touch on. The first one is, what can organizations do to change inclusion from a concept to action? And a great question. I think that's sort of what we're trying to do with that's exactly what we're trying to do with our framework, right? Where we are giving organizations clarity on how they can do exactly that, change it into action. So inclusion is not just I'm feeling this or this sort of like fuzzy thing that's this nebulous concept that no one really understands, but rather we actually define inclusion as an action, as Lisa shared earlier, I think at the very beginning of the deck and the presentation. It is the act of ensuring that folks are feeling more included, and so, or not feeling excluded. And so our categories will provide that opportunity to make it an action. So if we say, hey, in your organizations, Black women are in particular feeling left out of career opportunities, we are now telling you there's an action that you can take to drive greater inclusion because they have self-identified that is how they're feeling excluded. And that's really powerful for folks to see that and for us to give them that kind of action plan. And it really does become that, right? It becomes an action plan when they get our recommendations. Another question here. How can we get these organizations or companies to begin this process of change if prevailing culture is built upon denial? Yeah, it's tough. This work is not straightforward or easy. And through our work, working with our clients, we do actually engage in these conversations, right? The folks that reach out to us sometimes are fighting those kind of denial moments internally, and we help them navigate that. Lisa, did you want to say something specific on that?
Yeah, I would say yes to everything you just said, but and also we have conducted initial research and really the earliest days of our work, we're looking at how do you quantify the value of diversity and inclusion? And the reason we were asking ourselves that question was because it was, how do we prove to executives that aren't feeling excluded that there is exclusion in their organization and that they benefit from correcting that? And so, there's like a question beneath the question there. And so, what we developed initially were tools to help paint that picture that by creating more diversity, by creating more inclusion in an organization, you're able to quantifiably link it to improvements as it relates to recruiting, as it relates to retention, as it relates to operational efficiency, and as it relates to market appeal, like sales, revenue, credibility, right? And so by being able to kind of meet executives sometimes where they're at and say, these are the KPIs you care about, let us show you how this impacts those KPIs, and painting that picture through data and through simulations, we've been able to really open a lot of folks' eyes. One other interesting thing is, you have to get down the work to get to this place, but I can't tell you how many times we've conducted initial inclusion assessments with organizations and delivered our initial insights. And our insights are sometimes very specific. And you've kind of seen pieces of it, but it could be that folks with an invisible disability do not feel like they have the ability to grow within your organization, and being told those very clear types of exclusion often move business leaders to a point of, I think maybe a month ago, we even had an executive that was like, I want to cry right now. And it was a very powerful moment because you could just see that this person was processing the fact that he did not have this awareness that these folks were feeling this all around him on a day-to-day basis. And so sometimes it really is just like, you need someone to come in and kind of pull the curtain open and say, look, you're doing great, but here are the opportunities for doing even more. So hopefully, I guess the short answer to my long answer is, we hope to be able to come into organizations and shift that conversation. And we're happy to provide you as many resources as you need to get to that point with us. Or even not with us, but we have resources. So reach out to us and we'll give you what we can to empower you in those conversations.
Awesome. I see that we're just at time now. So thank you. Thank you everyone so much. Really appreciate you all joining and attending this workshop. Again, send us your information in that form and we'd love to be in touch.
Yeah. Thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you.
This session, I had the privilege to help pre-record last Friday. So what you'll be watching will not be live, just giving you a heads up. This session is titled Living in a Tech City, Austin's Role in Bridging the Digital Equity Divide, a IUPRA UT podcast live event. Aaron, roll the tape.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Ricardo Lowe, and this is my partner in crime, Tracy Lowe. And we are not related, but we are here to show love and grace here. Today, our topic is living in a tech city, Austin's role in bridging the digital equity divide. So before we start, I think it's best for us to introduce ourselves. And since I'm talking, I'll go ahead and go first. So my name is Ricardo Lowe. As I stated earlier, I'm currently a research associate in demography here at IUPRA. I'm also a PhD student in applied demography. And I'll let Tracy go ahead and introduce herself now.
Yeah, and I'm Tracy Lowe. I was the former assistant director for assessment with IUPRA. I'm currently with Dallas College. So I'm glad to be here for this event. And we will, before we get started, have Dr. Wright come up to introduce the purpose of the topic that we chose for Startup Week.
Sorry, y'all. Dr. Wright has left. I do not see her.
Okay, that's cool.
All right. So you can go and see your part, Ricky.
Yeah, so pretty much the main thing that we want to discuss today is equity in tech. We really want to talk about the digital equity divide. And how we came across thinking about this is the fact that we know we live in the city of Austin, and the city of Austin is this technopolis, this city where everybody is moving to. A lot of people are working within these STEM careers. Years ago, there was a urbanist is what they call him, but he's a scholar who works on urban populations, and he coined this phrase creative class. And everybody was talking about this creative class moving into the city of Austin and working in these STEM related careers. And Austin has developed this nickname, the Silicon Hill, right? Very similar to that of San Francisco being Silicon Valley. And so thinking about the history of Austin and just the inequities really that occur across marginalized populations, and this new change in the occupational structure, this new change in the private sector in the city of Austin, we really wanted to have an in-depth conversation about what this looks like for the future of the city. I can say that maybe a couple of months ago, we wrote a brief at IUPRA that really went into depth about who was moving in and who was, moving out. And the people who are moving in, they have a higher probability and likelihood of working for STEM related occupations. And in fact, if anybody's seen the news, you might see that Tesla is coming to the city of Austin. We already have Google here, we have Apple here, we have Dell here, we have Indeed here, we have it all. And so that really incentivized us to have this discussion. And so before we go ahead and get started with it, we want to ask the guests to introduce themselves. And first, we want to start off with Carl. If you can introduce yourself, talk about your relationship with, equity in tech, and then you can popcorn it off to whoever else you feel you want to pop it off to. And we'll keep going until all the introductions have been done.
Awesome. Thank you. My name is Carl Settles, and I'm the founder and executive director of E for Youth. We're in the process of going through a rebranding process, but there are the 4 E's, which I'm not going to talk specifically about, but let's just say that we employ change. We do creative workforce development, and we work with high school and college students. And more recently, we started to work with organizations that provide enrichment to elementary and middle school students to help them learn digital literacy, design thinking, and basic coding skills. And I will popcorn it off to Kelsey.
Thank you, Carl. It's nice to be here. Ricardo and Tracy, thanks for including me. My name is Kelsey Evans, and I serve as the Executive Director for Corporate Relations at the University of Texas at Austin. In my role, I am working really closely with the companies that are both here in town, that have been in town for a long time, that are moving to town, the broader kind of corporate partnerships that UT Austin is super fortunate to benefit from, and thinking about how do we connect those companies and where they're going in their workforce, their research, their branding engagement goals with the assets across the University of Texas. And so every company looks a little bit different in its footprint, as you can imagine, but I would say wholly, everyone's thinking about this space, Rick, and kind of where we are going and what's happening and how together we can move the needle. And I think UT Austin is particularly in a moment where we are thinking, where as the university can we be an engine of change with our partners locally? So I'm excited to be in this conversation. And I'll popcorn it to Stephen.
Well, hey, y'all, I'm Stephen Pedigo. I'm faculty at the LBJ School. I lead our Urban Lab initiative. My background is actually an economic development guy. I sort of advise cities on economic development strategy. That's been my work. I think now I've done that in more than 50 cities across the country, frankly, across the world, actually. And I think we're in an interesting space. I mean, Ricky, you made reference to a guy that I know really well by the name of Rich Florida. wrote The Rise of the Creative Class. Got a lot of cities to drink the Kool-Aid about how to build creative economies and what was sort of necessary to do that, but not a lot of thinking thought was given to the equity challenges or the externalities that come with this, right? We know that just by looking at research, right, the most innovative places in the world are also the most unequal places in the world. There's a correlation there. And what's been interesting, I think, in the field of urban development is that more cities are now saying, man, we want to build these innovative economies, but we have to make sure that we're thinking about how we bridge the gaps and think about this from an equity standpoint. And so for me, that's the kind of exciting part about this, is that I think we know how to build innovative based economies. The real interesting thing where the work gets complicated and I think more challenging is how do we do it in a way where we include everyone? And that's what I think we're going to talk a little bit about today.
All right. Well, again, we want to say thank you for being on this particular podcast for us. And so we're going to go ahead and just get started with some questions that we have for you. And I just want to let you know, in our panel formats, typically everyone can answer any of the questions, but we may direct a few questions at particular people. So one of the first things that Ricky and I wanted to talk about were disparities in tech. So, Carl, we're going to direct this question to you first. What type of disparities do you come across in your line of work related to tech?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, there's so many layers to the disparities that we see within tech. First of all, Austin was already the most segregated city in the country well before the tech boom ever happened. Okay, so that's been exacerbated. What you have is a lot of youth of color and their families are being pushed out of the core of the city. And so they're being pushed into these smaller outlying cities where they may not even have as much infrastructure to say, provide enrichment for those students in outlets for those students. So it's a multi-layered type of thing. They may be in a location where it's spotty or poor internet coverage and reception. So that's an issue. They may be in a household where they don't have access. They may have their only access to the internet is through their phone. Another issue. And also, I'm familiar with Richard, Florida. And, it's interesting that he calls it the creative economy, but we speak in terms of STEM. Creativity is what's driving all of this innovation. And I don't know of any other groups that are more creative than Black and brown youth. And yet we continue to cut them out of the opportunity. So, this is something I've really spent the last 13, 14 years looking at in our educational system. And I think the disparities really go back to, if you don't see people as fully human, then you're not going to make the necessary investment in them to make sure that they have the things that they need. And our students, they have their own internal, what I call a doo-doo detector, where they see where the people don't really see them or care about them, that they are working with in the school systems. And that has a deleterious effect in really systematically disenfranchising so many of our youth within the educational system. So all of those things contribute to the disparities that we see. And it really is an all hands on deck type of thing when we really want to start to try to address these things in any meaningful or systemic way. I could go on, but I'll stop there.
Yeah. And in terms of just addressing these disparities in STEM, what are some of you said all hands on deck approach. So just an overview of what some of those ways to address it are.
Well, for instance, my organization is starting to work with people that provide enrichment for elementary and middle school students. and it's digital literacy focused. But what we focus on is helping students use these tools to unlock their own stories. You know, we feel like people skip right over the cultural competency and the relationship building part of the educational process. And so students don't get that secure attachment, and they don't have any context for being able to learn or understand why these technical skills, use of technology can really catapult them into a brighter future. So I feel like you have to be very strategic in supporting these organizations, making sure that their students have access, but also that there's cultural competency that's embedded along with that. A big focus of ours is making sure that these students have digital portfolios in elementary school that can follow them throughout their entire career. Because what we have is people get certifications, but there's no proof that they can do anything.
Yeah.
And if you have companies like Google and Facebook, all these companies that no longer require degrees, what they're really saying, show us that you can do the work and there are opportunities for you. And so we need to be able to make those real world connections for these students much earlier, because the way that our school system is structured is we have career and technology education, or career and technical education is actually what it's called, CTE, and there are 16 verticals. And if you look at those 16 verticals, they don't really easily align to what the career paths that are out there within the tech and STEM career. So there's a lot of demystification that has to happen with a huge dose of cultural competency. And that has to be across all levels. So the idea for us is, how do we create that ecosystem where you could have 15,000 students that all have digital portfolios and have these this cultural competency and digital literacy skills. So that just becomes a given, as opposed to, hey, they might get that somehow randomly somewhere else.
So
Yeah,
Carl,
you know,
you're
you
saying,
said something. Oh, go ahead, Stephen. Go ahead.
I was going to jump in and say, so Carl, you're saying that the real key here is not just doing it on one-offs, but being very systematic by the which we're doing this, right? And trying to think about how we're systematically changing the system, so to speak, to really have impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the only way that you're going to really address this over the long term. And yes, all these people are coming to Austin, but they're the ones displacing the kids.
Yeah.
Because it's unaffordable so we also have to make the case to these companies, hey, you're coming here, you're benefiting. Wouldn't it be great if you were able to source some of your employees that actually come from this city? Because most of the people that come to Austin or that are in Austin now they're not from here. And so they don't understand all of the layers of history that go beneath. They don't know why Miss Jones looks at them askance when they walk their dog past their house, because she's lived there for 50 years when only Black folks could live there when she was there, and now everybody's gone and her property taxes are through the roof. So there's just so many layers to it. And that's why I said it really does have to be a systemic approach and an all hands on deck, because no one organization or just few organizations are going to be able to tackle this in any substantial way.
I agree with you, Carl. And just to underscore what you said, I think from the university's perspective, I think we have dozens and dozens, probably 200, 500 STEM organizations, our university groups that are out working in the community in the K-12 space in a variety, from STEM to STEAM to, everything in between, down at the Wildflower Center. But one of the key things that I think was a game changer in this whole ecosystem was the launch of the Austin K-12 collaborative system, right? So it's not just about the university, but it's about us plus the community. And so the work that's happening in our Division of Diversity and Community Engagement, the work that's happening with the STEM, the broader STEM ecosystem, until we're all coming together around those spaces and really intentionally moving and thinking through the changes that have to be made, including, you're right. And it's not just companies looking at, from at the K-12 level with skills, it's all the way up through the college level. Companies are coming to the university and not necessarily needing a civil engineer anymore. They need students with skills in this variety of sectors, right? Or, this skill set. So we're looking a lot at digital badging, mobile, digital credentialing that could start at a K-12 level and carry through at the university level so that people have a digital currency. They have a digital credentialing that could start when you're very young, right? So we're thinking a lot about this right now, and this is a good time to be drilling down on it.
I'm super interested to hear more about the digital currency. So like, how do we get that to work in spaces like in East Austin, where we know that there's historical exclusion of Black and Brown students? So in what roles can like local companies and corporations play in helping with this digital currency in these spaces?
Well, I can speak to, so what we're doing is we actually have a location-based oral history storytelling platform that utilizes virtual reality, uses Google Maps APIs. Each location represents a story. And the idea is that history hides in plain sight. So we have college kids that we actually employ that are collecting these oral histories, but we also employ them to work with our sister nonprofits that are working with younger students so that students can use those tools to tell their own stories. Okay. I think the idea of this history hiding in plain sight is a way for students, members of the community, to be able to really start to understand the layers of history that exist in their neighborhoods. There was a time when there was no I-35. It was East Avenue. It was flat, right? There wasn't this trench behind or that separated East and West Austin. And there was a time in 1929 when our city council actually had some consultants say, how do we get these Black folks from being all over the city? And their suggestion was, hey, we're going to make it so that if you want to build a house and you're a Black person, then we're not going to pave your roads. We're not going to give you utilities unless you move on the east side of East Avenue. We don't understand. That's the lack of depth of understanding that we have. So it's, yes, the technology is a part of it, but if you don't even recognize how we collectively got to where we're at, then how can you go about fixing that or addressing it? So what we've tried to do is set up structures where people can, employees can start to understand that process, at the same time help build up these youth. So by being able to volunteer to help these students learn these skills, but also to hear and empathize and share these students' stories, right? Mm-hmm. So I think sometimes we try and think in such a linear fashion, but we don't really think that way. We think radiantly, right? It's about building those relationships. So we look for those opportunities where you can really plug in on a deeper level to the community and cultivate those relationships. And I think a lot of these things will start to change in terms of the way that we look at each other and where are the opportunities to really leverage what we do so that we can support these students that so often are being pushed out of the core of the city. I hope that made sense. I don't know. I just felt like I rambled for 4 minutes, but it's all good.
And I would just add that I think the badging and the digital credentialing, that is something that is a role that companies can play, right? I mean, I know LinkedIn, which is part of Microsoft. They're thinking about this all the time. How do you create a digital resume for yourself that can live with you throughout your whole life, right? And so, IBM's thinking about this. It's a blockchain process, right? Is effectively what it is. So, but again, until we collectively come together and build something that everybody can use, so we're all speaking this, we all have a shared vocabulary, right? We're going to continue to have silos until we have a shared vocabulary, right? And that's a commitment from companies.
Yeah, I would also argue that our state's been entirely behind the ball on this too, right? I mean, there are other places that, I mean, I love UT Austin. I've been faculty here now a couple of years, but I am shocked about how far behind we are when I look at institutions in New York, for instance. I spent many years at NYU before coming. And our institution and many of our colleges and universities here are very behind the time in terms of thinking about this badging and what that looks like going forward. And so, in a sense, we're having to play catch up. I think the other thing that I would say to Carl's point, which I think is an interesting, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Carl, is that we're talking about this in the urban core, which I think is important. But to your point, many of these kids have been displaced already, right? So many of these kids are living in our suburban communities. And as we're trying to talk about, bridging the digital divide here in the Austin area, that means that this story also has to be taken to the suburban communities as well, which have become front and center of where change and diversity is happening across our metropolitan area. So, Carl, I would assume that you guys are starting to do work or are doing work in those communities?
Absolutely. If you go into the outlying areas, I think, Kelsey, when you're typing, that's coming through on the
sorry, thank you.
The microphone, no worries. We started over a decade ago, and I was really struck at first because I was a little bit naive. I would go to Pflugerville, to Manor, to Round Rock. It's United Nations out there.
Totally.
Okay. So a lot of these small towns, those are minority school districts now. And we work with a lot of these students, and they can tell you, because we're looking at East Austin, they go, well, you know what? I used to live on that street. And they're able to tell their own story about how they were eventually moved out of there. So you really do have to start to think about it, the entire Central Texas region, not just in Austin's core. How do we start to provide the systematic type of infrastructure that's really going to be able to support those students? And along those lines, with digital badges, we do use digital badges, and we've had a good bit of success. I know that there are kind of universal digital badging types of tools. I think the idea is, how do you start to get people to come together about that consensus about the things that are most important? When I look at, Texas Workforce Commission and what they say are the high growth jobs, I'm not really sure if those really translate. It seems like we're always behind the curve, I guess. We're trying to make kids be this, but things have already changed and they're not doing that anymore, if that makes any sense. And so, I don't know. I feel like it's difficult to develop that consensus, because also people are kind of territorial, right? That if they share the same standards with these other folks, then somehow that may diminish the specialness of what they do. I don't know. I don't have a great answer for that.
Yeah. I mean,
you go ahead, Stephen. You was about to say
something?
I
was reflecting on what Carl says. I mean, that's the $1 million question about trying to align workforce and economic development interests together, right? Where you getting companies and even just communities and cities to sort of realize that we're playing together on the same teams. We have to play together on the same team to address these challenges, right? And that continues to be the issue. I think also, to your point, Carl, in Texas, for instance, many of our industries are been fairly traditional, right? And as we look at them and we sort of say, these are the growth sectors, I still think I think we even as sort of an economic development and sort of city policy community are trying to figure out, well, what are these clusters and sectors going to look like going forward? So what is the future of space, for instance, in Texas? It's, it's being developed here, but we don't really know yet, right? What's the future of life sciences and those types of things? And so I think this is where what Kelsey's getting at as well. I think this is where private sector engagement has to be at the table. And one of the things that I think that's pretty exciting about Texas is that, generally speaking, we have a private sector that does want to be at the table more so than other places. That's true statement, right?
True.
Private sector does not, private sector doesn't want policymakers to make all the decisions. They want to be at the seat of the table. And so, I think the question is how do we keep raising these questions that the challenge isn't just about competitiveness. It just isn't about resiliency going forward, but it is about how do we make let more people participate in an economy that's changing really, really fast, and just keep hitting at this idea of putting equity at the forefront. And that's going to require the private sector at the table with institutions. It's going to require the private sector to beat the heck out of the state legislature who still doesn't get these issues right. So, there's some big policy questions too that have to, we have to change system and do all the groundwork that you're doing in schools across the metro that are really, really key. But the policy stuff also has to be there to support that too, I think.
It's huge. The state of Texas just dropped 2 places in state competitiveness because of some of the social issues. So from a business perspective, businesses are making decisions about where to move to, and they're saying Texas is off the table now. It's less attractive because of some of the social issues that we're working through, right? At all levels.
And I think there was a study by, I think it was Citigroup or Citibank a couple of years ago, and it talked about the trillions of dollars that have been lost basically due to racism. There is an opportunity cost that is associated with that. And I guess the thing for us as an organization, sure, you get a warm and fuzzy feeling from working with the kids, but that's not what we're trying to sell. That's not what we're trying to sell. We're saying, do you want to be competitive? Do you want to win? Okay, because if you do, you're going to need to be able to attract and retain. Because here's the deal: is that there are a lot of these companies that are hiring these young, talented people of color, and those people are not staying there. Because, and again, if you don't feel like people see you as fully human, why do you want to stick around, right? And so it goes very, very, very deep, and that's why I keep saying it's an all hands on deck type of thing, because there's no one solution. There's many pieces to it. And Kelsey, I'd be interested in understanding more about how you all are using the badging.
Yeah.
And because we do work with DDCE, and we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We want to. Well,
I will give credit to Dr. Art Markman, who has just been appointed by the president to take over Texas Advanced Extended Campus. So we are rethinking entirely all of our professional development training, both upskilling, reskilling, the whole spectrum of education. And so I'll give Dr. Markman a lot of credit for really accelerating the badging conversation. But as I think about it, Carl, maybe an opportunity is that we do a template of the badging with our UT Elementary School that's over on East 7th, right across, let's start there at the K-8 level, right? Let's figure it out in our own ecosystem, and then maybe it branches out to all of our schools, right? There's no end to what's possible. We just have to start somewhere and really check, click away at it. So. Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, that's so interesting to me because, the city of Austin, in terms of the student population, we have a number of kids, especially in East Austin, or probably even exclusively in East Austin, whose families are electing not to enroll them inside of the traditional public school district and instead are opting for the charter school population. So what are do you think that having this type of attention paid to these spaces can help to attract families back? What do you think the implications could be if we start to focus on introducing the digital badging into the traditional public school district?
It's It's a great question.
I know that Black folks have been moving their kids out of AISD for a long time because they, in general, don't feel like they're being served. So, you know, a lot of folks feel like there's an overabundance for kids that have means in Austin ISD. There's an overabundance of opportunity for them. I don't know if badges is going to get them back.
Yeah.
You know, and you have to also look at it's a huge economic issue as well. You know, if you're from California, that 1,000 square foot house that's going for $600,000, that might look attractive to you, but you know, a lot of folks that's a non-starter for them, especially trying to have a family here in Austin. So I don't know if badges are going to. I think badges, from our standpoint, we just go where the kids are at. You know, there's Texas Empowerment Academy. We're starting to work with them. If they're in Manor, we're going to Manor. If they're in Pflugerville, we're going to Pflugerville. We're going to go to where the students are at. I am a public school advocate, but I also recognize that not all public schools are really cutting the mustard. I don't know. And I don't know if I don't think it's necessarily for a lack of trying, but there's so many structural impediments to getting where we want, where we would like to see each other go, I guess.
Yeah. There's a lot of Black families in AISD and throughout Austin who, you said something about the doo-doo detector earlier, which I'm pretty sure you was using another word besides doo-doo. But there's a lot of families who feel that. That. So yeah, I don't know if badges will work either, but I'm just thinking about, you know, the work that you do and the collaboration that might be possible with other institutions or whatnot, and seeing as a way to, you know, fielding out Black parents across the city.
You know, it's interesting. I think there is an opportunity. I mean, we have to also realize that most of our teachers don't look like our students either, right? So there's a cultural divide that's there. And what I've seen, because we actually train these college youth of color, we put them in the classroom with these teachers, and we've seen their teaching practices improve just from those interactions. I mean, we don't just like set a college kid loose in a classroom. We have curriculum and activities that they do, but the idea of being vulnerable, teaching students rather than subjects, can go a long way towards making these families feel like folks give a damn.
Yep. Well, this is a huge topic of conversation from an education perspective. Is we do not have enough teachers, period, like hard stop for, you know, in the middle school, especially in the STEM spaces, but we particularly don't have enough teachers of color in the middle and in the elementary K through 12 broadly. And our You Teach program, which is a really signature program that teaches STEM students how to teach math and science in the K-12 space, launched about a year ago, an HBC You Teach program. So we are directly working to kind of solve this issue with our HBCU partners. How do you stand up and double down on that? And our, you know, Microsoft has been a huge partner in that. So you know, Rick, you asked about what's the role that companies play, right? Companies are empowered, like they are able to infuse funds into a system to empower, to enable change, right? That's what a company can do. They can infuse funds into an ecosystem that lets us test and try and get out ahead of things in an otherwise perpetually under-resourced environment, right? That is just the reality of all of our lives. And so that is where companies enable us to try things and get out ahead of them. And whether it's teacher training, whether it's, you know, training, current teachers to teach computer science. You talked about coding, Carl, and the importance of that from a that's coming for everybody, right? This digital literacy is coming down the pike for all ages, colors. Everybody needs to have this digital literacy, right? And I think that is a huge place where companies can step in and play a role of not only what are the resources that they can put behind opening up some of these opportunities, but as they think about their own employees, what are the volunteer roles that their employees, what are their employee resource groups can wrap around into the community and get out? I mean, that's a huge, I give so much credit to our local businesses that are really thinking hard every day. I mean, National Instruments, which is now NI, one of the first tech companies in Austin, they completely pivoted, they completely rebranded and aggregated all of their corporate social responsibilities around 3 key pillars, and that is, changing the face of engineering and technology, right? And thinking about what is the role in the community to advance change. So both what can their employees do, as volunteers and et cetera. So I think, and NI's not alone. I think Apple's thinking about this. Facebook is thinking about this. Dell's been thinking about this for decades. As Tesla moves in, I know they're thinking about it. Our federal credit union, UFCU, thinks about this perpetually, right? I mean, so we are so fortunate in this city to have companies that are willing to be at the table, willing to roll up their sleeves and figure out what do we do to make it better, right? What's our role in it? And I think it's just getting education plus tech plus it's getting all these leaders in the same conversation to be driving in the same direction, right? We're an incredibly powerful community if we're all pulling towards the same North Star.
Yeah. And Kelsey, I had a question, and it's for everyone, because when we start to talk about students and teachers, I'm wondering, how do we go about connecting all of these different pieces for this pipeline between K through 12, higher education, tech professions? When I'm saying higher educations, I'm not just thinking like a UT Austin, but we're talking about
it's got to be Houston Tilton. It's everywhere. It's ACC. It's everything. Yep, 100%.
Yeah. So, question for
along those lines, we started what we call the Creative Leadership Academy about 3 years ago, because we do hire college kids to work with the younger students. And so we started paying stipends. Look, if you just participate this semester successfully, you'll get a $250 stipend. And then we started hiring them at $15 an hour to work. I think the idea for us is that we're really trying to, there's so many kids that kind of fall between the cracks from high school to college. Maybe they graduate from high school, but they have most of the kids, you ask them what they're interested in and what they're good at, they can't tell you, right? And that's until you really start to address that in a really systemic way, you can throw all sorts of resources. They say you can lead a horse to water, right? But here, how do you cultivate that thirst?
Right. Well, maybe Carl, that's where the badging at a K-12 level comes in, because if you begin to collect a series of, it's like your Girl Scout thing, right? If I begin to collect a series of, I'm a builder, I'm a tinkerer, I got my badge in putting an electronic thing together. Like if you begin to have I'm a chef, I know how to bake a loaf of bread or bake my cupcake, whatever it is, whatever the skills are, if we begin to empower our youth with, you're good at these things. Look at these things that you have these badges for, right? Then when they get closer to thinking about employment, what are you good at? Well, they said, well, I know how to bake a loaf of bread. I built this thing. I connected these electronic circuits, right? At least it's a starting place, right?
Right.
So I don't know. I'm not a badging expert. I did not intend for this conversation to go in that direction, but I do think that, watching my own children, they're like, I don't know what I want to, I don't know. Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I think, the issue, a lot of it boils down to also is that, students that don't have as many economic means, they don't get that level of enrichment where they're really able to explore and go deep, and also develop that self-confidence that comes with that.
But there's so many resources for enrichment. That's where I think our companies can accelerate by putting additional resources into it. Like they don't have to create the enrichment, but for goodness sake, help us expand what colleges, universities, programs like E4, programs like Girl Start, help us accelerate what our enrichment outreach footprint looks like, right? That's a resource issue. That's a resource issue. So
yeah. Yes.
I'm interested to hear what Stephen has to say, because like I know you've worked with a lot of cities, and not just in the US. You worked with cities across the world. So what type of things have been implemented across the cities that across these spaces that you've worked with that Austin really needs to be capitalizing on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that struck me about Kelsey and Carl's conversation is just listening to you guys banter about badging there for a bit.
Sorry.
Which I loved as a former Boy Scout. I loved it. It's interesting, right? I mean, I guess one of the fundamental questions is like who in today's economy should own the idea of digital upskilling and skilling to ensure that we're doing the right things forward? And I think that's a big question, right? And what I mean by that is that for a long time, companies have just punted these questions to the publics and to the communities and to the school boards to deal with these questions, right? Mm-hmm. And then for a lot of times, they kind of throw their hands in the air when it doesn't go well, right? And now the question really is that the economy is changing really fast. The needs and skills are extremely sophisticated. We are wanting to make sure that the workforce looks more like their customers and the people that are using their technologies. And so now the onus maybe comes back to what does that mean in terms of private sectors to saying, look, we may have to own this more than we've ever owned this in before. And so
totally agree.
And to Kelsey's point, that is, we can't keep private sector companies can't keep hunting the ball and then throwing their hands up and saying it's not going well. So that means they have to start to think about how they fund programs like Carl's and others. They don't have to be the direct service providers, but they got to put some skin in the game. And I think that's where the fundamental change is, I think, in a lot of places now to address these issues is folks are saying, look, workforce, I mean, I love the folks in Workforce Austin. I think they're really fantastic. I think some of the things they do in terms of creating opportunity are really important. But they're not going to solve our technology skill gap for our technology companies. The technology companies have to solve those questions, right? And to your point, that means going back and starting to really do that at the very, very beginning in terms of how are we thinking about that.
And the companies are willing to do it, Stephen, but there's so many doors to walk through. They're like, I don't know where to start, right? There's so many, because we're a completely untethered, siloed community of people doing these things. There's 50,000 doors that I could go down. Do I enter door number 3 or door number 472, right? I mean, that's the onus on us as the service providers, right? Which I'll call us both as educators, as programs like before. Like, we've got to come together and have a singular voice, and like, how could money come into one or at least a few doors, right? And then be spread out across the whole system. Yeah. Because companies are willing to do it, but we don't make it easy for them.
And I hate to cut you all off, but we're almost at time. So we want to do some wrap up. This is a great conversation. Hopefully we all can come together and have it again as part of Black Lives Texas podcast for IUPRA. But again, I just want to say thank you all for joining us and providing such insightful information on this topic. And Ricky, I don't know if you have anything else you want to say.
No, I mean, I second everything that Tracy said. Thank you guys. And I wish we can talk a little bit longer, but you know what it is.
This has been awesome.
So I hope you all enjoyed this conversation. For more information about IUPRA, feel free to visit our website, and also feel free to look up each of these individuals on the podcast. So again, thanks everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much, you guys. Kelsey throwing up the horns there at the end. I saw you. All right, you guys, that about wraps up our HR talent and culture track. Before we go, I wanted to welcome to the stage Kathleen from Red Fan. A lot of you who watched the marketing and branding track yesterday definitely saw her face. I'm going to let her give us a couple closing remarks.
Great. Thank you so much, Marianne. It's a pleasure to be here. First of all, I just wanted to say why I appreciate Austin Startup Week so much. Number one, having the opportunity to spend time with founders and folks in the startup scene at different stages makes a world of difference. We see that we're able to really impact and help founders make smart decisions early on and really think through some of the big questions so they can avoid mistakes or as they move forward. Redfan Communications is actually a PR firm here in Austin, Texas. We've been here for close to 13 years. And we focus on B2B tech, high growth companies, and start from everywhere from early stage all the way through. We're known for helping companies get their positioning rock solid, really differentiate from their competition, get that foundation so that it's that messaging is happening across everything within your website to your social media. Everything really hangs together and your PR starts to move forward, your investor relations starts to move forward. And that's what we're known for. We help companies actually position for their exit. And you can see the writing on the wall early on, which is it going to be an acquisition? Is it going to be an IPO, or are you going to be a standalone company? We help you start thinking about that and messaging so you attract the right audience to you, whether it's investors or a company that's going to acquire you, or the right partners and lawyers and such for a truly successful IPO. This past year, we've done quite a bunch of reverse mergers, worked with Hyliion. We're known for working with Q2 Holdings. We work with Fluence Bioengineering here in Austin. And we work with just a number of really fantastic companies, but we're also extremely community oriented. And I'm on the board of the Kite Festival here, which I'm really proud of. So I really hope that you take away some great lessons from all that you heard today, so many smart people over the last few days, and that you're able to move forward knowing that you have tapped into some talent here in Austin, and that we're all here to be able to support you along the journey. So thanks so much. I hope you check out Redfan. I had one other slide I was trying to show. Let me see if I can pop it up. We had some fantastic resources that I wanted to share with you. It doesn't seem to be toggling, but I will. I'll send it over to Marianne, and she can share it with you. Just some great resources that you can download and have at your fingertips. Everything from when do you do analyst relations? How should you be thinking about that if you're a tech company? What kind of media relations should you be thinking about, and when? How do you plan? How do you staff, both internally and externally? So we love being part of Austin Startup Week, and I just want to thank you, Marianne, for inviting us, and we look forward to next year's.
My pleasure. Thank you for all you do for the entrepreneur community.
Absolutely.
All right. Bye, Kathleen. Okay, everyone, that's a wrap on the last day of Austin Startup Week, the last track. I hope everyone will join me at Central Machine Works today from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. I will include the information from Redfan in that follow-up email. Thank you so much, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Happy Austin Startup Week. Bye.